So we've been on a series of looking at the topic of leadership. We've had 2 fantastic talks by Matt and by Jenny. If you've missed them, go back, check them out. It'll give you more framework for what I'm going to be speaking about. But today, I'm going to be looking at Jesus' model for discipleship and how we can follow in his example of leadership. You see, I am more convinced than ever that we need to be people of the gospel. We need to be people of the gospel who take what we learn here and what we know here and take it out into that world. That actually there shouldn't be a separation between church and our daily lives. And whether you would describe yourself as a leader or not, whether or not you're in a position of leadership, I do think that we all carry influence. And that we will all have areas of life in which we're carrying influence. It may well be on a team at work, in a corporation, places at university, with our friends, our family, or the people we meet in a social setting. And so what kind of influence are you bringing? There's a Latin phrase that I'm slightly in love with to the point that I have it tattooed on me. And it says this, it says, lexi oradande, lexi credende, lexi viadende. And it means this, the law of praying is the law of believing, is the law of living. The law of praying is the law of believing, is the law of living. Or you might put it more like this, the patterns of our lives form the desires of our lives, which shape the direction of our lives. And so what are the desires that are shaping and forming your life? We're driven by our deepest desires more than what I think we're driven by our beliefs or our convictions. St. Augustine, a brilliant theologian, said, yes, we're rational beings, yes, we're believing beings, but ultimately we're desiring beings. We're driven by our desires. And so are your desires that of the world, or are your desires that of the kingdom? Because true Christian discipleship is to retrain our desires to that towards the kingdom of God. And when we think about leadership or the places in which we hold influence, it matters if we're currently being fueled by our desires of the world or if we're being fueled by our desires of the kingdom. Are we hungry for those that we know to come and meet the living God? Are we hungry for those around us to say, what is so different about you? And for us to be able to say, it's Jesus. Are we hungry for more of the kingdom? And when we think about discipleship, when we think about leadership models, a quick Google search will reveal many, many options for you. But the reality is there's one that we need to be looking at, and that is the leadership model of Jesus. And here it is. There's 4 stages. I do, you watch at the top, stage 1. Stage 2, I do, you help. Stage 3, you do, I help. And stage 4, you do, I watch. And it might be helpful as we look at this model, and we're going to look at each bit in turn, to think about, in each section, am I someone who holds a position of leadership, or am I in the position of a learner? Am I positioning myself as someone who wants to grow into leadership? It might even be a mixture of both. Stage 1, I do, you watch. It's often at the very beginning of the processes that the learners are most excited and most enthusiastic. And this enthusiasm comes from anticipation. It's not based on experience. Everything is new and fresh at this stage. The unlimited dream of possibilities, the thrill of being a part of something from the start, confidence is sky high in the learner at this stage. But experience is all-time low. A brilliant example of this, I think, are teenage drivers. Teenage drivers, so often when they pass their test, think they're excellent. And their confidence is sky high, but their experience is very, very low. If you've ever got into a car with a teenage driver, you will know what I'm talking about, and insurance prices reflect this. But we learn through watching others and then imitating them. Aristotle says this, imitation and practice leads to new nature. Think of it a bit like this. Think of a baby, a newborn baby who cannot yet utter a word. And yet we all speak to the baby, don't we? And you'll find that parents tend to be like, Mama, Dada, desperate for them to be the first name out of that child's mouth. And if you've spent any time around parent, you'll know how true this is. But this goes on for months, this kind of rigmarole. And the child is listening and observing what's happening. And eventually, they'll utter their first word. And the parents will rejoice, particularly if it is their name that is being said. The baby imitates what they have been hearing for months. And then they give it a go, learning a whole new skill at the same time. So who are you imitating? If you're leading, what kind of leader are you that others may want to imitate your style of leadership? As I said earlier, if we're going to be people of the gospel, we need to lead like Jesus leads. If we're going to imitate the way of the kingdom, then I think proximity to Jesus is critical. I think Jesus knew this to be completely true. He's not going to be a lone prophet wandering on his own, but he's going to be a leader who calls others to come and follow him as he builds this new community of believers who are going to go on to do even more than what he has done. So let's look at the example as we continue to look at the stage where Jesus, I do, and you watch. In Mark 1, Jesus calls his first disciples. And in verse 17, he says, "Come, follow me." Clear, directive language. It's critical if you're a leader and you're in stage 1 that you are using clear and directive language. Come, follow me, and I will send you out to fish for people. And the disciples, they go from casting their nets to being followers of Jesus. And they appear to have confidence in who he is. But at this stage, they have very little true understanding of what kind of leader Jesus is going to be, or even the work that they're going to be called to. And yet they're confident. They're full of enthusiasm. They're willing to leave everything and follow him as Jesus casts his vision for leadership. He casts a vision for what it's going to be like. Jesus has a vision for his leadership. He understands that his followers need to be clear in understanding what his mission is so that they can carry it on. And Jesus wastes no time in demonstrating to them exactly what the mission is and how it's going to feel. Right after that bit where he says, "Come, follow me," he goes on to cast out demons. He goes on to preach the good news. He even goes on to heal someone's mother-in-law, one of the disciples' mother-in-laws. He wastes no time in being like, come follow me and watch what I am doing. The disciples are going to be in the inner circle of the kingdom of God. They're going to help build the kingdom of God. This is an incredible opportunity for them. And then we see in Mark 3, Jesus appoints the 12. It says, Jesus went up on a mountainside and called to him those he wanted, and they came to him. He appointed 12 that they might be with him and that he might send them out to preach and to have authority over demons. And I think when we read that passage, and I've done this myself, the temptation is to jump forward and look at how they're going to be preaching the good news, how they're going to be casting out demons, how they're going to do the miracles and the work of the kingdom. But that's not the starting point. The starting point is that they might be with him. This is the foundation of Jesus' leadership model. That they might be with him. Proximity to Jesus. So that they can imitate the way of the kingdom. And the truth is that Jesus longs for you to draw close to him. He longs for you to imitate his way. To do the way of the kingdom, that his presence would shape you and that this would be foundational in your leadership. And the early days of being a disciple are like a crash course in what it's going to be like and what's going to be expected. They are watching closely what Jesus does. They're learning from him. They're inquisitive to what he's doing. So I wonder if you remember the thrill of what it was like to first join a company or a team. When you so believe in their values and their ethoses. That feeling of, I'm a part of this. The excitement and enthusiasm that comes from it. We see this with the disciples, the confidence and the enthusiasm of the disciples, and it's based on what they hope is going to happen. It's not based on experience at that point, but it is rooted in the proximity they have to Jesus. But Jesus also knows that this excitement and enthusiasm, it's going to fade. It doesn't last forever, and any of us who've sat in the place of a learner under leaders will know the enthusiasm you feel at the start doesn't last forever. It soon wears thin. But this doesn't stop Jesus from developing them. And right from the very start, Jesus draws close to them, he builds a relationship with them, and he is clear on his vision and his expectation to him. But this proximity that they have to Jesus, well, it doesn't come without a cost. We know all too well that Jesus isn't welcomed by everybody. The Pharisees, for example, they come in to oppose Jesus. They want rid of Jesus, and the disciples are starting to feel the heat of association with their leader. And what are they going to do in those moments? They start to feel the cost of discipleship, of choosing to grow in leadership. And in response to how the disciples are feeling, Jesus doesn't try and turn down the heat. In fact, I think he actively turns it up. He says radical things like, "Now then, you Pharisees clean the outside of the cup and the dish, but inside you are full of greed and wickedness." And I wonder what it would have been like to be a disciple as Jesus said stuff like that. I just imagine them stood there thinking, "Please stop, Jesus, just once, please, 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 no, no, no." Or Peter looking over his shoulder with the rest of the disciples towards the Pharisees and being like, "He doesn't quite mean it how it sounds." Because when you're in the position of being a learner, you sit under the leadership, right? And you nod with what they're saying when it's right. But it can be challenging at times as well. And this early enthusiasm as it starts to fade, which Jesus knows is going to happen. He understands that it's costly, whether you're a leader or a disciple, it's costly at times. And so he says this to us in Matthew's Gospel. I'm going to read it from the Message version. "Are you tired and worn out, burnt out on religion? Come to me. Get away with me and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. And I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace." Or as the NIV translation would say it, "My yoke is easy and my burden is light." Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. The Jesus way will not crush us. When Jesus says, "Watch what I do," and then imitate it. Learn from me. Not only does that learning include, yes, doing the work of the kingdom with the miracles and the healing and the preaching good news. Of course it includes all of that. It also includes the time spent with Jesus, the rhythms and patterns of prayer, the Bible reading, the private work that is done. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. Because if you want to experience the life of the kingdom, then you need to adopt a lifestyle of the kingdom. To be people who are rooted in Jesus. This is fundamentally important. And it's at this point that we then shift to phase 2. I do and you help. You see, the disciples are learning. They've watched what Jesus have done. They've watched him perform miracles, and they've watched him withdraw and spend time with the Father. And now it's their turn to get involved. We see it in the feeding of the 5,000. I won't read it all out to you because I'm sure you know it, but I do want to highlight a couple of parts. And in the story, what's happened is Jesus has been performing miracles and preaching the good news, and the disciples, understandably, they're tired, they're hungry, but the crowds have gathered in their thousands, and they too are hungry. And the disciples turn to Jesus, I think rightly so, and are like, "Jesus, let's just go home. Let's get out of here." But Jesus takes the opportunity to include the disciples in a miracle. I do, you help. "How many loaves do you have?" he asks. "Go and see." He sends them to go and find out who's got what food in this place. You go. When they found out, they said 5 loaves and 2 fishes. Then Jesus directed them. Note, Jesus' leadership is still very present, but he is including them. No longer do they just get to stand and watch. They are now participants within it. And then he gets them to hand out the food, having blessed it. And you can imagine being a disciple at this point. You have got a basket of food that never runs out. In front of your own eyes, you're now participating within this miracle. And Jesus is demonstrating through actions that including them in the work. He has active conversations with them to ensure they are staying pace with what is happening, that you're understanding what is taking place here. He's not rushing ahead and leaving them behind. He is actively including them and taking them along with us. And if we are going to be Christian leaders in the workplace, in our universities, in our colleges, then we have to take time to demonstrate. We also have to take the time to include people and take them along with us. Let's not leave people behind. Let's take them with us. Note the disciples, they're willing to play their part. They don't say, "No, thanks, Jesus. I don't want to do that." They play their part. They serve, they're a part of it, and it's part of the learning process. And as they start to shift from being watchers to being the doers, so their confidence starts to rise again. But now their confidence is based in example and experience. Confidence that they too will be able to do this one day. And I think for some of us, it's a really important phase that we enter. The phase of saying, "I'm going to be able to do this." You know, for some of you, I wonder if you have that seed of like, "I think I might be a leader, but I'm not really sure how to move forward with this." And it starts with putting yourself out there, finding the leaders to which you can imitate, the leaders to which you can be with, and to be putting it into practice. And so with the hands-on experience, the pennies dropped, the disciples understand that God is bringing the kingdom and that they too can play their part, the next phase begins. You do, and I help. There's a shift of leadership at this point. Now Jesus isn't just going to be the one doing it. Now the disciples are going to take the lead, and Jesus is going to be there. He'll help them. He'll facilitate it. But they're going to be going forth. And it's not a case of abandoning the learner in this space. It's about coming alongside them. But it's also about giving up space for them to give it a go. And there are multiple examples of Jesus doing this in the Bibles, but I want us to look at one of them, where Peter walks on water. So imagine you're the disciples, you're in the boat at this point, and Jesus starts walking on water towards you. And they are freaking out in the boat. And Peter looks up. And as he looks out, he thinks, but that's our rabbi. That's the one that's been teaching and training us to do the very things he is doing. And he is walking on water. And if I am being trained by him to do the very things he does, then I too must be able to walk on water. And so he says to Jesus, call me. So Jesus says, Peter, come. And Peter steps out of the boat and he walks on water. And yes, he eventually sinks. But he walks on the water. And I imagine Jesus, as Peter has stepped out and he's taken his first tentative steps on the water, I can imagine that Jesus is like, yes, Peter, you've got it. You understand the way of the kingdom. You can do the very things that I do. Finally, you're getting this discipleship journey, because Peter gets out of the boat and he walks on water. He does the very thing that Jesus has been calling him to do. He's being raised up. It's part of the discipleship journey. That we can't stay in the comfort of the boat, but we've got to get out and give it a go, knowing we will fail at times. But actually being willing to give it a go. And notice that Jesus stays close. He's able to reach out and pull Peter up. Matt said right at the beginning of this series that Christian leadership is a leader who lays down their life so that others can come alive. So if you're holding positions of leadership, are you giving up stuff and space, and are you sacrificing so that others can come alive amongst you? Not to leave them to just sink on their own, but grabbing them when it feels like they are and pulling them back up and reminding them of who they are and what you see in them. Are you the kind of learner or disciple that's willing to step out of the boat and give it a go? And critically, it's in stage 3 that we learn that mistakes are in fact going to be made, right? We're not perfect. We do mess up. But it's how we choose to respond to those mistakes that makes a difference. Jesus gives room for failure. He's ready to explain why things maybe didn't go the way they should have. And he gives the disciples chance after chance after chance to give it a go. In Mark 19, we read how Jesus had sent the disciples to go and do the work of the kingdom, but on this occasion they don't succeed. In fact, someone says to Jesus, I asked your disciples to drive out the spirit, but they could not. It's direct, isn't it? So often we can become crippled by fear. Whether we're a leader or a learner, we become crippled by the idea of failure. Some of us more so than others, admittedly. But it's fear of failure that stops us from even trying, or the fear of failure that makes us work so hard to try and eradicate the possibility of failure that it is completely exhausting. And in the face of failure, perceived or real, we have to go back to the first point, which is our proximity to Jesus. Proximity to Jesus in our daily lives. I'm not talking about waiting for the next Sunday to come around, but in the moment being able to turn to Jesus. Be reassured of who he has called you to be. Your identity in him, your security in him, and then we go and we try and we give it another go. The closer we are to Jesus, then the more secure we are in knowing that we are loved and accepted, chosen by him, even in the midst of our failures. And as leaders, we have to be able to demonstrate that we are going to mess up. We are going to get it wrong. And that's okay. And as learners, we've got to be able to say, I'm going to mess up. I'm going to get it wrong. And that's okay. And we've got to be able to extend grace to each other. It doesn't mean that behavior doesn't get corrected. Jesus goes on to correct behavior, but he does it with extended grace. He doesn't try and crush people in the process. Let's go back to the disciples. The disciples have caught the vision, they're learning from their mistakes, they're giving things a go, and their experience and their confidence and enthusiasm is now based on something solid. So now it's time for phase 4. It's time for Jesus to delegate. You do, and I'll watch. Jesus has wholeheartedly believed in his disciples from the start and saw their potential. We see it in Matthew 16, where he says, "And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it." He even says that they will go on to do greater things than that he does. Because Jesus knew that he was going to need a whole load of followers who would go on to be leaders, who would start the cycle all over again, raising up disciples to carry on the work of the kingdom. And it's in stage 4 that we move from Jesus saying, "Come, follow me," to go out into the world and make disciples. Go and make disciples. It's the same commission that applies to us today. And good, healthy leadership means that we will continue to develop leaders who will take over and hopefully go beyond the places that we go. And as leaders, that means we're going to have to let go. We're going to have to make some sacrifices, and it's not always easy, I admit that. So often our sense of self-worth comes from positions of leadership or our desire for leadership. And that means that when it's time to raise other people up, to allow others to take the reins, we don't always want to. But I think when we're in that place, it hinders us, both from raising up other people, and it also hinders the people we're trying to raise up. So a couple of thoughts as I come into land. I think it goes back to proximity to Jesus. When we're feeling insecure, and let's be honest, we're all going to have those moments where we're feeling insecure. No one is exempt from that. But when we feel insecure, we're going to struggle to release others. The temptation is to take control, to have fear that other leaders may well be more gifted than you. And such insecurities have destroyed even such great leaders such as Saul. And so the challenge is to dwell with Jesus. Allow him to tell you who you are in him. Child of God, loved, championed. Allow him to affirm your leadership. And then we've got to release control. Developing other leaders means releasing control, not to hold on to it and have such a high bar of perfection, to worry that other people won't do it as good as you. But actually, the reality of raising up other leaders is that sometimes our standards will drop, and that's okay, because we too have been in that position, and we will be again someday. We don't want to have such high levels of perfection that we forget the goal, that we're trying to raise up other people. We've got to give opportunities for other people to lead and to fail so that we can all grow. We've got to be able to identify leaders, and there are 2 essential ingredients to being a leader, the gifting and character. Gifted leaders, if you look around, will be those that carry influence in a group. There's always those people around. However, gifting alone is not enough. It must be rooted with depth of character. And I would argue in a Christian setting, depth of relationship with Jesus. And then we've got to be able to invest in leaders. And I think one of the critical things that Jesus does is invest with his time. We can't shortcut it. Leadership is often more caught than taught, and spending quality time with potential leaders is far more important than we realize, I think, and it's exactly what Jesus did. Modeling Jesus, extending the kingdom goes way beyond the walls of this church, as we well know. And the reality is that whether, as I said at the start, you're holding a position of leadership, whether you feel like you're called to leadership, whether you're holding places of influence, we need to be modeling what it's like to live life with Jesus. We need to be modeling what it looks like. And so let me return to where I began. The patterns of our lives form the desires of our lives, which shape the direction of our lives. And so what desires are shaping you? What direction is life heading in? Are they worldly desires or kingdom ones? If we want to exercise kingdom leadership, then I think it all starts with our relationship with Jesus. It starts with the proximity we have to Jesus, how we allow him to come and define us, to remind us that we are children of God. And it's in this place that defines our sense of security and our sense of peace. And I truly believe that when we are rooted in Jesus, the people who don't know him recognize there's something very different, and we're able to explain why. There was a brilliant story this morning Come on up, Peter, because I'm going to land with this. There's a brilliant story this morning from someone who is the CEO of a charity. And she said she took on the role, and then basically the old CEO took up quite a serious lawsuit that was going to really threaten the likelihood of this charity surviving. And after 11 months of being in a position of leadership, feeling completely out of her depths, she decided to fast and pray even. And so she did that. And I think it was like the next week, the old CEO gets in touch with her and requests a meeting. And he comes in, he apologises, and he drops the lawsuit. Only when she turned to God. And I was talking to her after, and she said it's transformed her leadership, that her team now gather, and even though the majority of them are not Christians, they start with prayer. It's the first time she told them she was a Christian. Just in the place of being able to turn to Jesus, and that's the difference. It's those kinds of stories where in positions in secular world, we bring Jesus.